Welcome back, Commanders. My name is Alchrist, and today I'll be briefing on your brand new T-Doll, the calm and serene Stargazer, Tololo. Tololo is a Sentinel assault rifle wielding, water shooting, multi-action doll. She focuses on hydro damage and giving herself multiple attack buffs to scale with. And after blasting enemies to the stars, she flexes on them with her signature hair flips. I will mention that in all my guides I'll be referring to Confectant's Index as skill points, since this is much easier to understand. Tololo's skill point generation mechanic is tied to fulfilling the conditions to our active skill 1 and 2. But to start off, I'll go over a passive, Aurora Curtain. Tololo will start the battle at max skill points. If she is at max skill points after using an attack, she will lose all of it and gain an extra action, allowing her to go again. This actually counts as another turn, and everything like buffs, debuffs, and cooldowns will be all reduced by 1. At the start of all of her turns, she will gain 1 random buff for every 2 skill points she currently has. And lastly, each instance of hydro damage anyone from your team does, Tololo will gain a permanent buff called Light Spike. This increases her crit rate and crit damage by 3% per stack, capping at 24%. Her basic attack is Meteor. Attack at a range of 8, dealing physical damage equal to 80% of her attack and reducing 2 stability. Tololo's active skill 1 is Black Hole Inversion, which has a 2-turn cooldown. It has a range of 8 tiles and deals hydro damage equal to 130% of her attack and reduces 3 stability. She will gain 2 skill points if this attack exploits phase weakness, either medium ammo or hydro weakness. Tololo's active skill 2 is Supernova Impact, which has a 2-turn cooldown as well. It has a range of 8 tiles and deals physical damage equal to 130% of her attack and reduces 3 stability. If she has at least 2 buffs when using this, she will gain 2 skill points and increases this damage by 20%. Tololo's ultimate is Morte Lumina, which has a 4-turn cooldown. It has a range of 8 tiles and deals hydro damage equal to 180% of her attack and reducing 4 stability. If she has at least 3 buffs, it increases the damage by 15% and reduces the cooldown by 2. When deploying Tololo onto the field, the key element to playing her is cycling through her skills to charge her passive's extra action. It's important to field her on maps that have either hydro or medium ammo weakness, otherwise it will hinder her skill point generation. She is capable of doing extremely high damage during her turns. When it comes to her rotation, on turn 1 you use ultimate. From the start of combat, she will have automatically started with 3 buffs, reducing her ult cooldown by 2. This will automatically start with her second turn, which you follow up with either active skill 1 or 2. The one you use depends on what condition you can fulfill. If she can exploit a phase weakness, use active skill 1. If not, use active skill 2. This will regain 2 skill points. On turn 2, use the opposite active skill. If you're using active skill 1 this turn, make sure you hit a phase weakness. If you're using active skill 2, you should have at least 2 buffs by default, 1 light spark and 1 random buff. She will be on 4 skill points after this turn. On turn 3, you can use ult again. You will have at least 3 buffs if you are able to generate skill points each turn. Turn 4, you will get another extra action turn. At turn 5, you can ult again, and you can just keep cycling through your skills after this. You should never be at a point where you need to use the basic attack. Onto her pros and cons. She's actually really easy to play. Her rotation speaks for itself. After the first cycle, you just use abilities as they come off cooldown, and she doesn't have any unique buffs or debuffs to keep track of. Comparing her to other Sentinel dolls, she has no downtime or setup skills, and focuses only on doing damage on her turns. And her double action turns are explosive, or you can split the damage if you need to. All of her fortifications are really strong, and she's on the standard banner, so there's always a chance to get her. And lastly, there seems to be a high amount of hydro damage weakness, which makes her damage stronger and charging skill points easy. As for her cons, if she isn't able to target a phase weakness for her active skill 1, her rotation really breaks down. She's one of the few T-dolls that do not have any out of turn damage. And while some dolls' keys completely change their playstyle or increase their damage, Tololo's are pretty mid. Her best weapon is Planeta. It increases crit damage, and its trait gives an extra attack buff if Tololo is at full HP at the start of the turn. Its effect Path Patrol increases damage dealt by skills by 4% for each kill, or gaining extra action, stacking up to 5 times. Once she has reached 5 stacks, she'll gain a buff which increases her movement by 2. If you got the battle pass, you can use the Guerno. It grants attack boost, and its trait grants an extra attack buff if Tololo is at full HP at the start of the turn. Cooperative Warfare increases damage and healing dealt by 5% for each ally within 5 tiles, capping at 3 allies. If there are at least 2 allies in range when she attacks, she can move 2 additional tiles. You can use QJ's Golden Melody if you have it. It has the same attack boost and the same trait as the Guerno. Charging increases damage dealt by 10%, and the second half of the effect won't help Tololo as she doesn't have any support attacks. If you don't have any of those, you can use the Model Alpha. It has the same trait as the other assault rifles, granting a random buff. Durability will increase damage dealt with active skills when she has an extra action. And lastly, you could use the QBZ-191, which increases damage by 10% when receiving a buff. Her attachments are the same as any other DPS, focusing on attack percent, attack, crit rate, and crit damage. Reminder that the only attachment that can give crit damage is the muzzle. When it comes to which attachment sets are best, Phase Strike is a good generic set that works on most DPS in the game. It increases damage dealt by 15% as long as they have an elemental debuff of some kind. Tololo can apply this herself with active skill 1 with the right fixed key. Otherwise it will rely on another T-Doll applying a debuff. Alternately, you can find the Hydro boost set. She does mostly Hydro damage with all of her attacks, and this set will increase her damage by another 5% over the Phase Strike one without having to worry about the debuff. When it comes to her fixed keys, her best one is 401, Invisible Light. When she gets an extra action, she gets an attack up and damage up for the next turn. None of her other fixed keys are super important, but add slightly to her utility. 201, Comet Tail Transit, increases movement by 1 whenever she gets an extra action. And 203, Principles of Observational Astronomy. When using active skill 1, it will apply a debuff congestion for 2 turns. The debuff itself isn't too amazing, it just prevents healing. However, it is a good key to proc the extra damage if you're running the Phase Strike attachment set. 403, Retrograde Motion isn't bad. It applies stun if you have an allied unit perform a support attack before using active skill 2. This can be triggered by most support dolls. Her last 2 fixed keys are pretty low priority. 601 removes 2 buffs from the target when exploiting a phase weakness. And 603, Stellar Eclipse, ignores some cover damage but requires max HP and stability, so probably won't be useful for long. Her common key is Afterglow, increasing attack by 5% and increases damage when not at max skill points. This is a pretty universal common key which most DPS gain from, which kinda sucks because you need to waste cores on a not so great keys if you really want this. None of the current 5-star common keys really benefit in any way. If you have it, Sharkery's common key, Opening Fireworks, increases damage when you have more than 1 buff, but I wouldn't go out of my way to get it if you don't already have. Next, we'll have a quick look at the Fortifications. At V1, if active skill 1 exploits a phase weakness, it ignores 15% cover bonus. At V2, turns her active skill 2 to Hydro damage if she has at least 3 buffs, meaning all of her attacks are now Hydro. At V3, if her ultimate is under effects of 3 buffs, it will do 30% more damage, and the cooldown will be reduced by 3 instead of just 2. This extra cooldown doesn't help her rotation yet, as she still wants to prioritize using her active skill 1 and 2 to charge skill points. At V4, whenever she gets extra action, she gains 4 different attack buffs for 2 turns. This is where her damage really pops off. At V5, the passive's Light Spike gives 5% per stack now, which is a big permanent 40% crit rate and damage once capped. And at V6, her ult now generates skill points on kills. This tied with a V3, she now gets an extra action every second turn, turning her into a walking nuke. To finish off, we'll have a quick look at suitable teammates to field with Tololo. I'll start with Sabrina, as I would say that she is almost mandatory to run with Tololo. The reason I say this is Sabrina is capable of dealing multiple instances of Hydro damage at once, capping Tololo's passive really quickly. She'll still work without her, but getting to 8 stacks of Light Spike with just Tololo will probably take more than 6 turns. Not only that, but Sabrina creates Tideway Tiles, which implants Hydro damage on enemies standing in them. Huge triple plus. Sustains is obviously Xiaomi as she's just good in general, but if you're a fan of Kolfni, you could run her instead. Kolfni's active skill 2 deals Hydra damage, and she can put multiple buffs on Tololo if she needs it. And speaking of buffs, Cheetah's ult places 3 buffs on allies, which is useful as well. Other dodge can run as Nemesis, since Tololo can attack both of Nemesis's targets to trigger a support action. She can also be great partners with Mosin. Tololo has great stability damage. Since she wants to attack phase weakness where possible, she'll get the bonus 2 stability damage on top, averaging around 5 to 6 stability at attack. Here are some examples of team compositions. Tololo can fill the main DPS slot in any team, and the Hydra team isn't quite complete if there lacks a 4th Hydra character, but you would run any DPS in the current lineup. And that about wraps up this character briefing for Tololo. I hope this guide helps, and if you have any other suggestions on a build or teammates, make sure to leave a comment below. Until next time, Commanders.